Yeah. What up, y'all? It's your boy Cap, aka Contramantido, aka Valdez Gonzalez de la Piedra de la Montaña. Welcome back to another episode of the ReKAP. Man, I got a spicy one for you guys this time. I actually had the honor of interviewing a woman by the name of Elizabeth Campos, who worked for the Friars Corporation of California, which is essentially the Catholic Church. And before I play this interview, I think it's important to stress what we call truth. And really, when you think about it, what truth is and what we believe is our beliefs is really just a repetition of what we've heard from the closest people to us. It's human nature. We hear it enough times and we start to believe it. And I say that to say this. There's people on this planet that you can give the cold hard documentation to and they would not accept it, of a truth. And there's other people who have been waiting to know this their whole lives. And so it's become apparent, like, history is written by the victor. And so the victor being, in this case, the missionaries, the Friars of California. So I'm going to play this interview of Elizabeth Campos, who actually was responsible for redacting documents that were written in Father Junipero Serra's writing and Brother Joe's writing. Anything that had any reference to a friar killing a native or beating a native, they had to redact that because the Roman Catholic Church, in order to sanctify Father Junipero Serra, they were going to go through the records. They were going to audit them, for lack of a better term. And if there's any reference in there of them beating a native or, any murders that happened, they felt that he would not be sanctified. So, without further ado, I want to play this interview. This is Elizabeth Campos, who I got to meet at a manifestation downtown Ventura. This is the ReKAP.
I was an administrative assistant for the corporation, which is the Fransiscan Friars of California. And I worked as an administrative secretary in the office of the provincial, the head of the province. Father Serra was a Franciscan. He was the first Franciscan, and it was he that established the province. And there had been talk for years and applications for beatification of Father Serra. And as that was coming close, letters were received from Rome saying they were going to come and examine all the mission documents. And the friars decided that Serra would never be a saint if that current papal envoy and people read the history of the friars. So they pulled out the paper was all yellow and breaking. And they brought it out, and they paid me and one of their friars to go through page by page and take out every reference to a friar killing an Indian and every reference to an Indian that was killed by friars. And at first it just was that, this person's page killed by Indians. Oh, this person's page killed 4 Indians killed by their family. It just was that. But as I got older and older, closer to the mission time, when Father Serra himself was still alive, there were names of individuals, and there were the history of their whole family, one by one, beaten to death by a friar because their father didn't show up to do carpentry work or to make adobe bricks. And every night I went home and cried, even that I'm a white person, because of the hatred and racism that this country is. And I quit the job. I couldn't finish the job. I couldn't get the last 30 years I couldn't get to. And I left the church, and I will never go back. I knew when I heard that this protest was going on, even though the city announced they're trying to move the statue, that I needed to be here, because so many people who were raised in this church believed that Father Serra was a holy man. Even Father Tom. One thing Serra did was, indeed, it was in the history, go to Mexico City and ask for a rule about human rights for the indigenous people. And in that request, he said, I will take them all to the mission. I'll move them into the mission, and I will take care of them. And he did not protect one person. He beat people. One friar fought with another friar in this history I believe it was 1822. One friar fought with another friar to stop him from killing an Indian that was already bleeding to death. And I'm sorry I used the word Indian, which is not good. And that friar was kicked out because he was one good person. He was kicked out. You're no longer one of us. You can't be one of our brothers. Because he protected a man whose life was in danger. And that's why I had to come today and tell that story. Because, they all say, oh, that's not the history, that's not the history. Well, I read it firsthand. I read it in the handwriting of Father Serra, and in the handwriting of Brother Joe, and in the handwriting of Brother Jeff, who came after Father Serra. That's an evil history, and it needs to be told. Taking down the statue isn't going to change the history. It's also not going to change the beliefs of people who don't know that that's a history, or won't accept that that's a history. And what Father Serra's friars did to these indigenous people in this mission, and in all the missions up and down California, was murder. When the Spanish arrived in the Americas, there were 80 million people in South America. And after 10 years, there were 8 million people, indigenous people. In North America, there were about 26 million people when the Spanish arrived. And by the time 12 years had passed, there were not even a third left. So that's our history. And I'm white, but I recognize that's the history of my ancestors. And I am traumatized too. I cry myself to sleep. Why was I born a white person? With families who do those things, with ancestors who did those things. So that's my story, but this is not about me. It's about getting rid of the symbol of hate, which is a religious symbol and constitutionally does not belong on the outside of City Hall, and the other statue that sits in the main lobby of City Hall has to move also, and nobody's talking about that. You walk up those steps and go inside, and there's Father Serra inside. I don't know why or when the decision was made not to list names and ages, but suddenly that stopped. And it was about the same time that they kicked out the friar that was trying to protect one family. And they stopped listing names and ages, and they also started burying them away from the mission. So Father Tom said, oh, there's 3,600 buried there. Well, where are the other 2,000 or 3,000? Because there's a lot more than 3,600 from this mission alone. I believe that there were 12,000 Ohlone people in San Jose and San Francisco, Oakland area who were killed by the friars in the mission period. And there's very few graves there in those missions. So we need to, I just believe, that everybody here who's Chumash and people of color can speak till they're blue in the face. There are white people who will not listen, but they'll listen to